Oh, nice. Some familiar faces. Javier, Nicole, Victoria, good to see you made it. So we'll probably give another minute or so in case there's a few stragglers. There's usually a couple that kind of sneak in towards the end. But in the interim, welcome to the Behavior Analysts Who Code monthly meetup. This year, we're doing kind of a spring set of events, and then we'll have a fall set of events to kind of align with the semesters. So this is our second event in the spring series. This one where you have a panel discussion with several esteemed doctors in the field of behavior analysis, all who have a really unique and interesting history of coding, and really was excited about each one of them in particular and pulling them in because I think they have a unique perspective on how they got started and information and advice they can offer. So how this event is going to be structured today, I'm just going to turn it over to them here in a minute or so. They're going to go for about 5 minutes and just give a little bit of background on what they do, how they got into coding, what they're up to now in their research and or practice. And then that'll last maybe 15, 20, 25 minutes. And then on the back end, there'll be an opportunity for people to ask any questions that they may have. So feel free, if you have questions, you can throw them in chat or hold until the end. And if you're interested in getting BACB CE certificate, I'll be throwing those codes in the chat throughout. But yeah, without further ado, I'll turn it over to our panel.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Perfect.
All right, I'm Nick Green. I actually know David from we went to University of Florida together in our doc program, so that's how I got linked up here. But I would say probably as you get to learn everybody else, I'm probably the less traditional type coder. So I got into kind of big data analysis in my day job and practice, in which I needed a solution for analyzing kind of big clinical data sets, which isn't anything new, but basically I was using Excel that took too long to graph things. And I came across a tool called Microsoft Power BI, which is business intelligence. And I kind of learned about this whole business intelligence field, which exists in business and industry outside of like research and practice, just in the business setting. And so I learned that there's a language called DAX, which stands for Data Analysis Expressions, which is basically like an Excel Power Query type language. And so it's pretty intuitive. I've been a big fan of it because there's a great community. It's a Microsoft product, so I'm able to learn a lot from it. But yeah, so I also have a background in organizational behavior management, and so I kind of look at the coding tool in itself of how it plugs into an entire system of getting things done really for the organization that I work for. And so with that, I'm able to complete analyses in my day job, and also my expertise is in health and fitness behavior change. So I have a practice outside of that day job that then I apply the same business intelligence to, wait for it, I call it fitness intelligence. So gathering big data sets, connecting it together to make meaningful health and fitness dashboards for my clients. So that's a little bit about my background.
I'll go. So I am an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. I primarily do research in behavioral economics and addiction and substance use. The way that I typically use, so I would not call myself a extensive programmer, but I use R heavily in a lot of the work that I do, primarily just in all types of data analysis and all the publications internally in terms of kind of like project management. R is basically my go-to for anything kind of looking at data. I use a lot of R Markdown for generating like interim results, kind of looking at stuff. And then I've written several manuscripts completely in R Markdown too. And I just find there's a lot of stuff that it might take some more time at the beginning, But once you kind of streamline a lot of stuff, it seems to be pretty easy, especially if you can plug it into the rest of your workflow. And that's basically the extent to which I use stuff. I've created back when I was in graduate school, created some kind of Excel tools, kind of plug and play. You just enter some data in and it automatically calculates some stuff. And that was primarily just out of a need for us doing the same thing over again. We finally decided, well, why are we doing this when we can just kind of generate a template to save us time and doing all that stuff. Are we talking about how we got into coding yet, or is that going to be like one of the questions later?
Yeah, no, go for it now.
Yeah, okay. So back when I was a graduate student at the University of Kentucky, we actually had a stats center, which was the Center for Research Methods and Data Analysis. And I ended up taking a random stats course. I really liked the professor. In the stats course, we were forced to use a programming language. And that's when I first learned R. And I ended up doing a graduate research assistantship, worked part-time there at the research center. And we basically would be contracted out to do projects. And so the way that I learned the basics through that stats course, but then I really learned how to kind of scale things up and think about projects from a higher level first, and then kind of break down into what are the, how do we put all these moving pieces together through that hands-on experience with a really good mentor. I continued to take stats courses, was able to apply my experience with R. I just got better and better as I just worked with it more, encountered the same issues, understood what's going on underneath the hood, how to troubleshoot stuff, and really then started trying to apply that to my own stuff. And so I ended up first, it kind of started light in terms of just the regular data analysis, kind of making a couple figures. And then due to a series of constraints, I ended up kind of doing my dissertation within almost an entire R framework, from collecting all the data, importing it, analyzing it, and then writing up my dissertation. And using R in a combination at that point of LaTeX as well, kind of before R Markdown was really popular. So that's kind of how I started, and I've just continued to use R. I just always try to find a reason to use it. I think once you get past a certain level of being uncomfortable, not knowing how the language works, once it starts to click, then it just becomes easier and easier. And with most coding, programming languages, the understanding the logic of everything is like 80% of it, 90% of it. And then it's really the syntax that's the other 10% that you just got to say, oh, this program wants me to write it this way. But fundamentally, you're doing the same thing.
I guess I could go next. I'm a very new coder. I think it's been just over a year by a few days from when I took my first R course. So I feel like I maybe have less experience than a lot of y'all out there. But I also have really fresh experiences with how I got really into it. And I'm one of those people that when I get into something, I get pretty into it. And I can't remember why I was kind of adamant or really seeking out a programming class, but the way I got into it was I was doing a postdoc working in school districts with the kids with the most severe challenging behavior and kind of supporting the systems to support the interventions they were developing. And I reached out to an instructor who was doing an intro to art class and just asked if I could sit in to his virtual class, and I could like watch his videos anytime. And so I did that last year, and I think I watched 2 of his lectures, and it kind of was like, holy crap, I can do so much with R Markdown. That's the main coding language that I really like too. And so one of the big things that I really like to do is make data interesting to look at, because I think people like looking at data as long as they're presented in the right kind of way. And so I was really into the ggplot package of R specifically, but then also making reports that I could present at IEP meetings with data that data collectors, kind of a workflow where they can just send their data through a Google form that automatically pulls in through R and spits out the report kind of automated. So kind of simplifying the process. But to get kind of the skill set that I needed and understanding the logic of how it all worked, I played a lot of Code Combat, which if you don't know what that is, it's just codecombat.com. It's just like a video game, and it was like $10 a month, and you get levels and stuff. And I think it was only in Python, so I had that like Python syntax is just slightly different than R in ways that it's hard to remember sometimes to go back and forth. But that really helped me like understand the logic of things that I could then translate over to using with R Markdown. But I would say a big thing for me was the purpose and the motivation and the reinforcers drove learning more of how to make those reports in the beginning. But then when I saw all the things R Markdown could do, I like built a website. I just barely built a website for my curling club to keep track of our standings, like in a live way. I put my CD up there. So it's kind of finding ways of things that coding would make my life better, really. But then in November, I started working for a literacy research group out of Virginia, or the University of Virginia. And they hired me kind of to be like one of the data managers, which is great. I'm like, I can figure this out if you have confidence in me. But it's been really useful, my behavior analytic background, to apply. So basically built like this ginormous survey that they're giving to a lot of kids in Virginia. And one of the parts of my job is cleaning the data and making sure it's valid and all these things. But the way they built the survey entailed a lot of errors by the data collectors. And so on our second round, I've been able to apply my behavior analytic kind of strategy to shift how they enter data to make it more likely that they're more easily successful in being entering everything right, but then also providing feedback immediately if they're not, so we can kind of make sure they get on the right track. So even on my primary like workload is in R, I'm coding all day, I also get to be part of the teams to like nudge people towards designing things in reinforcing ways. So I'm trying to think if there, yeah, I would say Code Combat. The other big thing for me was doing the free code camp challenges. The way they set it up, I don't know if any of you have done that, but you get experience in a lot of different languages. Like you can do CSS kind of things, HTML, JavaScript, Python. I don't think they have R, but it's kind of like you get percentages like increased towards completing a chunk of the challenges, and that was really reinforcing to me. So it really helped. But yes, I think that's all.
All right, so I guess that leaves me. I guess I'm probably the odd one out because I had a different order for programming. I was fortunate enough to have programming classes in high school, which naturally I took as a teenager because I wanted to cheat at video games. Like that's ultimately, what got me into the field. I entered my undergrad thinking I would be a programmer, but fell in love with applied work. Got very fortunate. Mary Lou Kerwin had a really great undergrad track for behavior analysts, and went from tech programming into behavior analysis, and then for a while just focused on behavior analytic training. But as I was in the field longer and longer, I felt frustrated that there were things that, let's say, I would want to manage a field a certain way, or I'd want to manage a contingency a certain way, and the current technology just didn't support it. So throughout my career, I've found these little niches where there's just no commercial products that really have the degrees of freedom that a behavior analyst would want. So some of the current things that I'm doing, I'm a full open source kind of guy, so all my stuff's on Git. So for the past couple of years, I've been really big in augmentative and alternative communication because one, the software, any decent software costs at least $300 and requires an iPad. So part of what I took a Mary Curie fellowship for a couple of years with the UN was developing some software that's open source, open science, build it so that you could use behavior analytic procedures, the typical way we would run a trial, how we would do within stimulus prompting, to build that technology to one, meet a clear clinical need, and then two, answer some still relevant research questions about technology and behavior analysis. We look back to Miranda's stuff with AAC 20 years ago. They were asking, what does technology bring to the table? And it's a really hard question to answer empirically, either through single case or group design, unless you could hold all those materials constant. So there's been a couple of RCTs I've run where I have behavior analytics students and we run these protocols, and then we have high-tech and low-tech versions of our behavior analytic interventions. And to be able to control more specifically for just the modality. And that's been pretty powerful. And that's kind of been the niche that I've kind of moved in with this tech background. Not necessarily to just develop new things, but to answer some of the hard questions we have about technology. What does that bring to the table when the contingencies select behavior? Is there some type of interaction between doing it through tech and then doing it the typical way we do? For a while, I've done a lot of that stuff with AAC, and now I'm moving more towards education. So looking at some of the interventions that we have for reading, for math, for children. A lot of those things are in front of a screen now, and we still have those same questions. We have good equivalence-based programs for teaching those skills, but we still have a lot of lingering questions on, what does technology mean for that acquisition, that generalization and maintenance. And that's a little bit where I am now. I'm sorry, my background, I'm a behavior analyst and a school psychologist. I'm an assistant professor at LSU. And that's kind of where tech falls in the type of work and type of research questions that myself and my lab asks.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And as you can all see, they have highly varied backgrounds and play around with different languages, I think, which is why it's exciting to have them all here. They have a variety of experiences and expertise. But I have one question to kind of kick us off, and then I'll open up to the group. But I have a long list if people don't have any. But just like when we first contacted behavior analytic literature, it was a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff, people, terms being thrown out, a lot of things you feel like you should know. Behavior analysts that are probably looking at programming, coding, they're interested in it, and I'm guessing, just like I was, 8 years ago, very overwhelming. Where do I start? How do I pick a language? What do I even do to get started day one on this? What advice do you all have for getting started? Tomorrow I wake up, what do I do?
I would say pick something fun. I know, and that's probably just me. This is just my own anecdotal experiences. I think some of my earliest programming experiences that were really rewarding were, finding ways to tinker and to do things that were fun. I think some of my earliest ones were trying to get Doom to run on as many devices as possible. As a teenager, first exploring C and C++. It was reinforcing and it sprawled and it kept me engaged with the content, even though it's at times, things just don't compile and then nothing works. If it's fun, there should be enough reinforcement along the way that it'll carry.
Yeah, I would say that's a good approach. I think that I unbeknownst to me or unknowingly took the approach of basically making a commitment response and had a contingency in place, which was I have to pass this class. And in order to pass the class, I have to learn this side of the programming language. And so just by virtue of that, that it had to be done. I know a lot of people in the class took the class because it was a required class and wasn't really interested in it. I mean, by itself, statistics, a lot of people don't like, and then you have to learn this foreign language on top of that. But I would say if really you get defining like what it is you want to do, it's not like you're going to just start taking all the available programming languages and apply it everywhere in what you want to do, but choose something that you would like to do with it and kind of maybe assess to make sure it's not too difficult or not too complex initially. Like I'm going to speak from either in our side or even I do some work in late tech, but like if you wanted to make a graph or if you wanted to analyze, get some descriptive data on something, all you really need to do with something like R is learn how to import the file. It's a CSV or a text file or an Excel file. And then there's a number of different packages that are able to basically just summarize your data. And you just kind of start piecing it like that. And fortunately, with R at least, there's so many resources available for R. And you can, Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow. Even the complex issues that I run into, a lot of people have had either similar, not necessarily the same, but highly similar issues that they've ran into. And I think once you eventually get down the line, you're able to adapt those things. But just something that interests you, kind of like what Shawn was saying, in terms of, it being fun, but also something that you just want to be able to do that maybe you do a lot of, or you find yourself doing repetitive things with. Just try and do that. But at first identify what coding language or what thing you need to do in order to do that. R just is really good for like the data analysis, data aggregation and stuff like that.
I'll go next. I think my approach was more of a, working in industry that I had just a general business efficiency problem to solve of like, okay, we have large sets of Salesforce data in which you have 100,000 rows, and I was graphing in Excel, right? I'm pretty savvy at that. And I just thought, okay, this is becoming way too inefficient. What tools and resources do I have available in my company? So wearing my OBM hat, I'm just kind of looking around, assessing what is there. I was like, okay, if I just start connecting these pieces, and really what happened for me was I said, oh, I can connect these data to this interface, and I can watch it refresh and automate, and I can make graphs in the middle. So I'm saving, 8 hours of efficiency there, because we all know how long it takes to make a manual graph in Excel, right? And so along the way, as I was plugging my tools together, I realized, oh, there's a language in between that I can start manipulating. And then I realized, again, I think most of us, if we come from just our traditional graduate programs, everything's pretty much in Excel, right? We see that, or depending on where you come from, you might have Prism or R if you have other colleagues like in the room here. But for me, I saw, oh, there's a language in here that's kind of built inherently in these tools. And for me, whenever I chat about the technology in any respect with people nowadays, it's like we live in an amazing world that just there's languages happening everywhere we don't realize it. And I just happened to see some lineup there, and I started clicking, and I was like, oh, this is kind of like Excel. And that's only the language I was pretty much familiar with. I mean, I know of R and Python and everything, but then I started learning then too, just to advocate for Power BI. There's a tremendous community There's tons of YouTubers like there is for R and Python. It's a Microsoft product that comes with updates. So it's very easy for me to learn. So that's how I kind of picked up in it. But I would say I was an above average Excel user. So that's how I kind of got into just learning it. It's more of a practical efficiency approach. If like I just didn't want to spend 8 hours a day making manual Excel graphs, and then I learned some DAX and it helps a lot. So
Yeah, and I would say there can be a balance of getting some resources to get the basics if you're really a beginner with all of the logic and everything, to get some of the basic ideas that would help you, like loading in data, writing a file, that kind of thing. I was modifying script that I had written in December, and I was like, oh, I didn't know how to use a mutate function yet, because I was like creating a new column of data by creating a new vector to the data frame I had already, which it was really fun to see that progression of a new skill that made life really easy. So like if you do take there's so many online kind of experiences you can have to get some basic skills. But then I agree with what others have said of why are you wanting to code? Like, what do you think it'll do for you to make your life easier, more enjoyable? And you may not know entirely, but if you're here, I imagine like you all have some experience with coding and can see the utility of it. So figuring out how to make those things, your coding skills work for you in that kind of way. And if I also imagine, this is an assumption, but I feel like coders maybe are not immune to extinction, but like are okay with really, really, really thin schedules of reinforcement to figure out what they need to do to make their code work. So just, yeah, using the resources you can find on Stack Overflow and things until you figure it out. And if the motivation is there, then it'll probably keep going. And then using the resources you have, like the behavior analysts who code and like the community and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of a balance. I definitely feel like I could use some more formal training to get the things I don't know yet. But I know how to write functions now, so I feel like I'm super, super cool.
I would say the extinction-induced response variability is a real thing, and embrace it, as you'll try pretty much every little tweak to try to get that thing that's supposed to work. Like you look at it 17 times, it's like, it's right, it's correct, I know it is. And it's that end bracket that's floating somewhere that you just couldn't find.
And then you go for a walk around the block and you're like, oh, I could just do it this way, which is way more efficient. Yeah.
that was going to be my input there, Kerry. I like taking my walking breaks, and then sometimes you just got to walk away and magically, I'll say magically, but new ideas happen and you come up with a solution.
Yeah, learning to read error codes. I think that's if you can figure that out, saves so many hours. But yeah, are there any questions in the audience? I have others I can ask, but before I do, make sure people have an opportunity. I have one. I bet there are people here are thinking, but maybe afraid to ask. How do you pick a language? Like there are dozens, probably hundreds of languages you could pick. How do you? Yeah, what's that?
I will take the unpopular opinion, which I anticipate, where as someone that, like my earliest experiences were in the C-based languages, where there is minimal abstractions from like what's actually happening at the level. I would say depending on your goal, if your goal is kind of like a hobbyist looking to supplement, something you're doing, I think it makes sense to do a high abstraction language, where it's something that there's a lot of things built in. You don't really have to do much for the code. But if you're thinking that's long term, this is like a specialty, you might want to to do, I think it may make sense to start with the languages that have the least abstraction, so like a C++ or even a BAWC. Because having that training, I know why, let's say if I use R, I know why R does terrible with loops because I understand how it reallocates memory at the bare metal level from how I know how C works. And that's why for most of the stat software I do, I prefer to do it in C just because I know in that language, I have much better control over how that memory behaves at that level. Now, that's not going to be true for everyone, but if that is something that you foresee, this being a big part of, your work, it may make more sense to start with the things closer to bare metal.
And can you explain bare metal for those in the audience who may not know?
So there's almost nothing between your compiled code and the actual processor that's running it. There's not like it's not like you have code that gets compiled, that gets fed to an interpreter, and there's all types of steps that go involved before it gets computed and then populates back up. Just less stuff in the middle.
I largely agree with Shawn. I think, but I think one of the first things he said was kind of related to the approachability of it. I think that if you get, at least I'll speak from my own experience, if you go straight into something like C, like a low level language, you could run into that bang your head against the wall really, really fast, and that could just not be fun at all. So I think also weighing it with, like Shawn said, like what's the goal, and can you do it? Can you achieve basically the goal with maybe a set of tools that's already fairly refined, and then work from there? Because there's always ways to go lower level with stuff. And just as you become more comfortable with it, that's really the thing, is like just getting some of that early reinforcement from seeing things happen, and then going from there.
Yeah, I don't mean to hog the talk, but I know in work with R, that's actually really nice because Dirk has his R CPP package, which is really nice because if you do have, you can work with both ends, you could work at a high level, but in R, you could use the compiler. R is compiled for your machine. You can actually have your own C++ files compiled that R can directly call. So sometimes you may get at a point where I can't really get at and solve this problem at the current level of abstraction, and I may need to drop down lower to really do that right. And having a little bit of background on each is really nice, because every once in a while there's like a weird quirk, and it's down low, and you may want to get down there.
My only thoughts on language selection kind of comes to like marketability is that I've looked at various like data science, like job descriptions. I'm sure some of us have, is that I'd say that the three top languages that pop out the most are R, Python, and SQL. If you have those languages under your belt, or any one of them, maybe not all three of them, but that's a big resume booster if you're a behavior analyst that wants to get into some type of industry or practice, like on the data science side of things. So that's the trends that I've seen from looking at job descriptions. As if you're looking to join a specific industry and want to learn some code, then find that company, look at their data science jobs and see what languages they use, and then learn that language.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Kerry?
No, I think the only thought that came to mind with my new job, I have different groups I'm working with, and some people use like SPSS, which I remember using early in my master's program, helping as a grad assistant, and they use syntax. And just my thought was it's good if, like, I feel really good in R right now. Like, I know there's a ton more to learn and everything like that, but pretty fluent. And I encourage others in my friends group to use it, especially for making their figures and things. But it's really good to then, if you do feel good in a specific one, to try another one and just like have that contact, remembering how foreign a new thing looks, so that when you're encouraging your friends to try it, that it is like pretty weird if you're completely new to it.
Yeah, that's fair. I tried playing around with little C++ with Unity recently, and I was reminded how different it is from Python. It's kind of fun. But,
Don't they switched to mono? Don't they give you some options? They let you use a couple different languages, their plugins, right?
they do. Oh yeah. I saw it as an option. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get hardcore, lower abstraction, and then I was like, I understand why I appreciate Python. I think after that, but I got it to run. That's all that matters.
I did a little bit of work back. I did some video game stuff for my dissertation.
Oh, nice.
But it is really nice to be able to compute things like velocities, right, in C, because it gets run tons and tons of time. But if you want to do that,
Absolutely.
it's kind of bogged down after a while.
Yeah.
Oh, I will say that I think it is helpful to maybe take like an intro computer science course just to understand how computers work fundamentally, and transistors and binary and all that, and how memory is allocated. Because just having a little bit of that background does help a lot in terms of understanding stuff that's higher up. Even if it's only like one of those, like the Harvard CS50 or class or whatever it is that you can take online for free. I think it'll just help that much more.
Yeah, that's great. And that actually leads to, I think, two related questions that I have for you all. So one is like resources or platforms or anything, courses that seem to be helpful that people might be able to take advantage of and get started. And also related to that, though we can save the world with behavior analysis, it's probable if people want to get into coding that they're missing skills. What are those skills that they may not know that they're missing, in addition to, computer science and coding? Like, what are some other things you guys can think of? It's like courses, resources, skill sets to learn.
I mainly kind of like learn through books, but I think apart from like books specific to languages, I always thought the books on coding practices were really good. So the Clean Code series was really good because that's a skill that you're really never explicitly taught. But if you're going to put any effort into something, it's good to do that early, just so that you don't go down a weird path and go back to the same code, a week later and can't remember anything about how it was structured. So learning about patterns, anti-patterns, good coding practices, it's good to get a little bit of structure in that before you start, writing lots of code files or some massive classes.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think one of the books that I come back to most frequently is a book I have on algorithms, and it's just like the logic behind them, regardless of language. Yeah, and similar to that effect, like those fundamentals.
I think that, depending on where you're at, like if you're in university and you're an undergrad or graduate student and you have the opportunity to take a programming course, especially like if you get like a tuition waiver or something like that, or you have an elective that you need to fulfill, a class is always good because it's going to be structured. You're going to have a teacher there who you can ask. Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange, especially learning how to Google the correct problems and stuff that you're having, that's a skill in and of itself, is to know how to Google the issue, and not so you're led down a rabbit hole of, then you like find out 30 minutes later this has nothing to do with what I'm actually encountering, is really helpful. I think that's more as you become maybe intermediate, you're a little bit more familiar with it. There's lots of like now that our studio has really like started to beef stuff up, there's a lot of stuff related to art, at least a lot of the just books online. I think that like Hadley Wickham has some of his books, and you can find like the PDFs of papers and stuff. And there's some books, if you want to message me or email, or I can put in stuff into the Slack group. I have tons of different books, especially the books that I used early on learning as well. But honestly, the internet now, there's just so much good stuff on the internet. And kind of what Shea was saying, like the different coding camps and stuff that are available as well, and the challenges. Those are really good. It's just honestly Googling like
Brent, just to kind of
how to do X, Y, and Z in what was that?
Sorry, I was going to say I totally agree, and I think the only other thing I would say is when in doubt, read the documentation. I think if there's anything that as a programmer I have kind of shot myself in the foot for, is I start a project without reading the documentation, hit a roadblock, struggle with it for a weekend, only to realize if I had read the documentation, it probably would have been a problem. So
I'll also say, yeah, I'll also say I've been trying to do this more in my work, is to put a lot of my stuff up on Git, and I know Shawn does too, and reading other people's code, other people's stuff and their comments and their workflow, just reading it, you start to learn so much more just in terms of what's the general practice, what do we do at the beginning of a file? How descriptive do we need to be in our commenting? Lots of that stuff. So a lot of that, the books, the tutorials, the reading other people's code, I think that all comes together and works synergistically with each other as you're progressing through becoming more and more comfortable with the code. At the end of the day, it's a foreign language, and you just got to kind of immerse yourself in it.
And I think to Shawn's point about when you said reading the documentation, I feel for me as a pretty new programmer, I do go in there a little bit more now, but in the beginning, it was a little bit hard to navigate. So a little unrelated to your question, Dave, but it would be interesting to kind of set up what the important skills are, or cusps and things within coding skill sets, like the ability to read the documentation. How do you know if you're there? It could be a good thing to strive for, and how can you get there if you're not there yet? I also think reading other people's code is super helpful. I remember reading one of my supervisor's scripts for something, and I was just like, it's so pretty, because like my code is a bit of a mess still, and I'm like getting better with conventions and that sort of thing. But it's really fun to read people's code that knows what they're doing, because it's so orderly and easy to follow. So I think that's really helpful. And I think for Hadley Wickham's and some other, I know for our product books, they're all like on not only GitHub, but you get to see their script of how they compiled their books. So I have like the hard copies because I like to take notes and things, but I also go and read it in like the raw script to see how it all works, to what it looks like on the page. So doing that is all useful practice, I think. But I think also, Shawn, something you said that I'm interested in resources is having some rules for yourself about how you do things, so you can do them repeatedly over time. If anybody else is less organized with that sort of thing, I'm a bit of a pack rat for files and things. So I have to always have an archive folder in every project. But knowing those kind of things is a skill that I would like to improve on for sure.
I actually had one, it made me think of it going back, just because all these concepts are so interrelated. The whole like getting started with something. If you have an idea of what you want to do, or like a project, go find something that's similar to that, that's out there, that is or has already been made by someone, and download the raw files, compile the thing yourself, go through it line by line, and it might, some stuff might be confusing, but like you actually see this product that's actually in motion. And again, I am coming from this as a, you know, just an art person, but taking someone's, you know, compiled document or whatever the whole thing is, if they post their, you know, our markdown, downloading the thing and actually just running it and line by line, and you'll see how it comes up. And that you almost feel a sense of you did some of that, even though you didn't, but you ran it and you did something with it. That can help too, kind of like maybe just at the beginning to get the feet wet as well.
Yeah, I don't, I've read some other people's codes, like just the language that I look at, they're just very simple measures. And so that wouldn't be like a whole screen of code, but I found some interesting like ways to look at, like if I'm looking at some type of, I'm more into like dashboarding and looking like a set of visuals all at the same time for my role and purpose. So I may look at some dashboard that's more of like financial forecasting. So it's not exactly the content that I'm looking for, but the same principles and codes and filters and everything are there. So I have to like look at like, how do I generalize this equation or code or function into some type of clinical outcome that I might be looking at. So that's been kind of my strategy, and that's kind of the resources, because there aren't coders and businesses out there that are looking at big data for clinical outcomes, like something that all of us might be looking at or whatever it is. So that's been kind of the challenge, but I found there has been some type of, right, like Brent, you mentioned the extinction induced variability. I'm like, I know it's in here, I can't figure out where, but somehow I need to figure out how this forecasting Q2 equation is going to, apply to, right, my hours approved or whatever it is. So that's just something that I've figured out of, even though it's a different industry, there could be something in there to look at and learn from.
Now, I know we're coming just about on time. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask the panelists they're curious about? Long drink off my scotch.
I have a quick question. This is Gilroy, and this is my first time joining this group.
Well,
and I just wanted to get an idea, like, I just became a BCBA a year ago, but I haven't started working yet. I have 2 little kids who didn't get, their vaccinations yet. So what I'm wondering is, if it is not, too simple for you to answer, like as a BCBA, so I'm into coding a little. I'm just a beginner, very, very, I'm at the B of the beginner. So like as a BCBA, can we use coding, programming, all those languages that you talked about, Python, C++, and, R, as a BCBA in our work, like in OBM? Or is this something that you guys do like a side project, like a hobby? That's what I'm curious.
I would say that when I started getting into coding, I was already finished being a case manager as a BCBA in home and in a clinical setting, but I did have to write a lot of reports for insurance approvals. And those are really long documents, at least at the places that I worked. And I wish I had known how to use R Markdown then, because it would have made it so much easier to just have all the figures for behavior, like progress on goals and things like that, progress on overall goals for a kid's program, things like that. It would be a lot easier to manage your caseload because you could just have a template file, and as you get new kids are all going to be unique in certain ways, but you can have the structure and the ease of running it and producing those files without having to worry anymore about formatting, like in a Word document where things don't go in the right place. So that's like one application that I would have loved to have used when I was doing that kind of job as a BCBA. But in addition, if you get really into it and we're more in the gaming side, I think gamification is such a great way to get someone who might not be into learning something to like learn how to do it because it's part of the game. So that could be applied with different languages if you built your own games and things.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, I would add too, it would just depend on the nature of what your kind of clinical work environment is, because you just kind of have different, I'd say like 3 different buckets, and Kerry, mentioned one of like, you have some type of coding sophistication where you kind of see that, that aha moment of like, oh, this is not practical to create Word documents that formatting is all over the place. Or you just have somebody that has, right, just basic word skills, so you're kind of stuck with that option. But 2, you also have, right, we know big companies, industries pay for software platforms to then just produce, like you enter all your documentation there. So I kind of see like 3 different kind of pieces there. So it just depends on like what your skill set is, what your company resources are too. I think it's going to dictate a lot of too, depending on what your skill set is, like which direction you go. Like if you're just starting and your company has a software platform that requires documentation, then you're going to put everything in there, but it still doesn't take away, to Kerry's point, of like, it could be inefficient and it doesn't have things formatted the best, but you're just kind of stuck with like whatever the work contingencies are in place.
Just to jump on to Kerry's point, I think I really noticed the need to automate things when I was not only just the BCBA, but the supervisor of others that are also doing that work, because behavior analysis does not scale very elegantly. Certainly not for the person that has to sign all those reports. So I kind of found a similar thing. And Kerry, I did some similar work, but more on the charting side. So to make the graphs look nice in R, I mean, the multiple baselines you could do in stock R are not great. So I spent a little bit of time making my own, but Kuba, for the same point, to kind of help make behavior analytic practice scale a little bit better, because there are certain things that take a lot of time that we could potentially make a lot easier.
And I guess I'll piggyback a little bit on this too. I think where I started to get really interested in coding was I saw that there were systems and processes that were generating data that we might be analyzing in isolation. And I wanted to bring those together and kind of understand how they all fit together a little bit better. So that's how I originally got into coding with data science in particular, because it allows you to play with data sets in ways that you may not be able to out of the box with some of those programs. Other questions for the panelists? All right, I have one final question then to kind of send us home. So what kind of final advice? We've talked about a lot of different things today, how to get started, resources, how to pick a language. What's some final advice, I guess, that you all have for people here that want to learn how to code?
You might, if like you're getting into coding, you might get into it and ultimately you might not like it. I mean, I think that's a reality of it, but I think that kind of sticking with it at the beginning is helpful. And like Nick said, like there are a lot of jobs in various areas that look to people who have these types of skills. Even if you have some basic proficiency in them, you don't have to, like, if the thought of, being an expert programmer in X, Y, and Z is very daunting to you, know that I think everyone probably on this panel probably believes that they're not a very good programmer. themselves, or that they, they can always, I know I can always write my code better. I can always do things in a more efficient way. That don't let that, be in an unachievable like benchmark. Because you'll always get better, and there'll always be changes to programming languages too that you'll have to learn. You'll have to adapt as new standards come out. Comment your code. Always make sure that try to find the best practices about stuff. I always like to run fresh workspaces, always, just to make sure that everything runs as it should, because what it looks like yesterday is not necessarily what it looks like today. And then something breaks and you don't know why. And then, like the behavior analysts who code the group is like, you have such a good resource right there with all the different people. I get emails, about my R package for demand, and people are asking these questions, and I'm just happy that someone else is using it. And I always take time to especially if they can give a description or just something about like what's going on, help me understand it. I've helped everyone that has like reached out to me. So if don't be nervous to reach out to someone and ask them for like help, especially if it's it might be more difficult with packages from like real big name people. They have probably a lot of stuff to do, but don't be embarrassed or anything by reaching out and asking a question, especially after you've done your due diligence to like try and figure out, you've used your logic, you've eliminated certain things that it could have been. Email the person, and you'll probably find you'll learn something new. And ultimately, like people have said, if it's becoming aversive, just step back, like do something else for a little while and go back to it with a fresh set of eyes, because there will be ups and downs. And don't take too much of a break from it, because then you'll have to like relearn like, oh yeah, this is the way that I was doing X, Y, and Z. And it helps just to do it consistently, not too much at one time, but kind of just gradually improve the skill sets. It's basically what I would say.
To jump on that, Brent, yeah, I think don't be an island. I think I just lurked back on my GitHub, and I think in October I've been on GitHub for 10 years. And in the last 10 years, programming is a much more social exercise than it used to be. Like there are a lot of folks out there that put these things out there, and they're pretty open to communicating about what they have or how they did it. So I would say don't be shy about reaching out to folks that especially do open source work. I mean, they put it out there for a reason. I know I typically have lots of folks that have questions. So I would say definitely be social. When in doubt, when you do something, even if it's not your favorite, even if you kind of get bored of that, I would say put it up on GitHub, put it up out there. Every once in a while, you find that someone has kind of had your idea or had something like your idea, or halfway there, and a lot of those things are out there. So be social, reach out. Most folks that do this stuff like doing it and like sharing their work. So go for it.
I would add that we're all behavior analysts from behavior analytic training. So don't forget you have skill sets of how to increase skills of others. And it can be really hard to apply that to yourself. And as I was thinking of that idea, I was like, I should do that for some of the things. Like what contingencies can I arrange to make me organize my files better or things like that. So you apply those skills not only for skill acquisition, but if you have OBM background, so it's another big thing of how can you build systems for yourself and systems for your team and things like that to help improve your experience. And like Brent was saying to step away if it's aversive, like remember to follow your values. They can diverge, right? So use this, you have a ton of skills, so figure out how they can be applied towards building your skill sets in this.
Yeah, I think I would reiterate some of the earlier points too of yeah, find like a meaningful problem that's fun to solve for you. So for me, what's really helped me like learn a lot of the dashboarding and equations that I like to run. I look at my own health and fitness data. So that's something that's a passion of mine. It doesn't directly apply to my day-to-day work, but having that as a self-monitoring tool, right, a benefit for myself personally, and I can learn the language along the way and other parts of all the system, because the platform that I use it is kind of a more of a system that has many other parts, just like the other tools do as well. But yeah, just making it fun, because yeah, that's the last thing you want, is it to become aversive and then it's not useful anymore. So yeah, start small. If there's something that can help you like in your practice that you think it could help, improve, start there, and then program for your reinforcers, right? So
Well played, fun play with words. I think it's a perfect way to end it. But Shawn, Nick, Brent, Kerry, thank you for coming and sharing your advice and wisdom. Appreciate it. I put the link to the BACB CE survey in the chat in case people want those. Feel free to click that link. Again, thank you all for coming. Thank you guys for being on the panel. Yeah, and I'll see you all in Slack. Have a good night, everyone.
cool. Thanks, David. See you, everybody.